Tēnā koe te rangatira, huri no ki te ware nei a tēnā tātou katoa. The Waitau River that I'm going to be talking about is the largest river on the northern side of Tauranga Harbour. And if you know Tauranga Moana at all, you'll know that the big issues there are water quality and sedimentation. And from that comes big issues, the encroachment of mangroves are sort of spreading throughout the harbour, and the loss of fish. So caring for the Waitau River isn't just important for the local community, but it is for the whole of Tauranga Moana. So what I'm going to be talking about is an overview of the community response, taking of the responsibility for the Waitau. And I'm going to highlight some of the key drivers that have led to the establishment of the networks that now work together to care for the river and the communities that connect for it. Now, the actual beginning of the whole care group network starts with the local iwi Ngāti Pūkenga. And they became very, very concerned because of the loss of kaimoana. The poor water quality, the encroachment of mangroves over their fishing areas, and that led to a research program with Whenua led by John Quinn to monitor the water quality and to research the fish species on the river and its tributaries. So monthly monitoring began in 2005 by Tom and Hinanui Cooper, and Hinanui gives her apologies for not being able to be here today, so I'm going to try and pass on her message to us. Now this monitoring will continue to 2013, and the Waitau was actually the most monitored river in the whole of the Tauranga Moana Harbour, and maybe one of the most monitored rivers in the country. So Whenua continues to analyse the data and publish the results. And they'll soon have a Facebook page so we can all keep up with it. Now they brought in other resources. They brought them in from Ngā Whenua Rahui that I work for. And they had funding to actually collect the kōrero of the local kaumātua. What was the river like before we changed it with the way we live on the land? They were able to get some funding to fence some of it, to do some planting, especially on the areas that run through Maori-owned land. Now the results over the last few years, it show that even now the water quality is improving, the fish numbers are going up, things are happening. The tituko, the little mud snails, the numbers have gone through the roof. They've come back in droves, and Inui tells me. They're still concerned about sedimentation from one of the local quarries. But at this stage, the general community wasn't involved. And then in 2006, an application was lodged to put up a rubbish dump on an old pumice quarry just up the road from where the work had been done by the local iwi, by Ngāti Pūkenga. And it was going to be a modern landfill, very carefully designed, using the latest technology to ensure minimal impact on the local environment. It was going to accommodate 440,000 cubic metres of compacted material and a whole lot of recycling and so on. And so we all received great wads of paper of all the reports and everything else that they had done to show that this was going to be viable. And then, of course, the local response was what you would expect. Who wants a rubbish dump in their backyard? And so everybody started to jump up and down because, yes, we don't want a rubbish dump, but not on that site. In May of the previous year, we had a huge weather bomb. At home, about 300 metres from the dump, we recorded 316 millimetres of rain in less than 24 hours. And the proposed dump site became a river. And even huge concrete buildings and things that weighed many, many tonnes were picked up and shifted many, many hundreds of metres down the river. And this was where they were going to actually build their rubbish dump, because all their tests and all reports said that this site was suitable. And then they said, but that was a 100-year flood. Yet local people can remember there had been even bigger floods in the not too distant past. And so the community got together. And it was a really coordinated response. The data from Whenua and Ngāti Pūkenga was a big factor. Rainfall records from the local people were put together, photographs of the flood were collected, more detailed ecological reports were compiled, because, a consulting firm will be given so much money to do such a report. They don't have time to do the detail. And the people who did that report were friends of mine. I know how much time they had. But looking closer, things were much different. And we especially detailed the earlier response. And so after a long period of silence, the application for the resource consent was withdrawn. We were told at the beginning, don't bother protesting, it's a done deal. They'd already rebuilt the road to take for all the rubbish dumps. What it did show to us that if we do respond to these issues, if we are organised, if we do work together, we can succeed. And regular floods still occur down our road. Most years the road gets closed for 1 or 2 days. We can't go to work, which is wonderful, or can't come home from work, which is terrible. And the rubbish dump site continues to be flooded. And when people come and ask us, would this be a nice place to buy and build a house, we just give them a little bit of local information. The site has not sold. And so we accidentally found we had a community group, a whole group of people who were strangers mostly to each other, who were brought together by this one issue. Now you'll notice the spelling up there for nursery. That reflects our local dialect. What the actual rubbish dump proposal or the rubbish dump threat did to us is got us talking to each other. And so the long-time residents told us, this used to be a real community once. We used to have picnics together. We used to know each other. We helped each other, and none of that was happening. We also learned from the data that Hinunui and Tom had put together that our rivers and streams contained a big number of freshwater fish species. We even had piharo, lamprey eels living in our river, but that the rivers themselves weren't in the best of shape. They needed a lot of care to be healthy again, for the kids to be able to swim safely in the rivers. We wouldn't let our kids swim in the rivers because if they went in there with a cut, they came out with a sore. So, and the other thing we learned, that if the community was ready and willing to do something about it, there was lots of support there. The Landcare Trust really came to the fore. Robin Skelton, now working for Environment BOP, was the Landcare coordinator for the area at the time. And she brought people together. The regional council started to give us resources, as did the district council. If the community was ready to take up the challenge, the support was there to ensure that we had real resources. But the community can't do much. The councils and agencies can't do much if the local community is not actually going to do things. And so within a short time we started having meetings, and we actually started our planting initially with plants that were supplied to us with funding that came to us from councils and other sources. And lots of the people up our road actually had their own little nurseries. And so we started to share things around. Sometimes we brought in species that were foreign to the area, like kōwhai and hauhere and stuff like that. But by and large, people were collecting their seeds, doing their plants and sharing them. So not only did the locals start to get to know about the land and its needs, they also got to know each other. Through all this, strangers became friends, and community spirit really started to grow. So we re-established the picnic on Waitangi Day at Sarah and Robin Brill's place up the road, alongside a little stream that we were looking after. We started having quiz nights, we had walking groups and all sorts of things. All of this came out of the threat that they're going to give us a rubbish dump. But then we began to realise how big the task was, because Waitau Stream is one thing, but we had lots of little streams and swamps and all sorts of things, all of which needed to be done. So we decided if we bought plants, it was going to use up most of our funding. Much better for us to start growing our own plants, collecting our own seed from our own area. So we set up a nursery. So some of us are seed collectors and propagators. Lots of us help with the pricking out and the growing on, and we all try and have our planting days, even if some people can only bring some baking and have for the cup of tea that follows. Now, it's during the cups of tea that we become a community, and so often the cup of tea takes many, many more hours than the actual planting. The other big issue that we have is that the area's been farmed for over 100 years. And so lots of the species that should have been there have long since disappeared. So what we are trying to do is to restore the full range of species that were historically present in order to enable the birds to come back, for the insects to sort of build up again, for all the things to happen so that we've got a really healthy functioning ecosystem. And so that became one of our major goals. And because within our group we've got people with that sort of expertise, at least we're very good at talking about it, and we are making some progress. And then we began to realise that, you know, we're doing all these wonderful things. We're doing them for our children, but the kids aren't here with us. They're not involved in any way. So we did the obvious thing: let's have a children's care group. And we'll bring all the kids together so that they can learn to do the things that we are doing. They can have lots of fun doing those sort of things, and that becomes part of how they see their world. So we started the group. We've only just begun, but heaps and heaps of kids turned up from all over the place, not just from our road, because lots of parents want to teach their children, and they're looking for opportunities to do so. You know, the Forest and Bird have that Kiwi Conservation Kids Network, but we've got a group in Tauranga. Every catchment needs its own kids group. And make it fun and get them involved, and then our children will carry on from where we've actually left off. So that is in actual fact becoming a big, big goal. And we put the email out, all the kids that come together. We always have a sausage sizzle. We always have lots of fun, and lots of parents who don't come to the planting days come to bring their children, and they all help out. So again, we are building our community. So some key considerations for us as we actually work amongst our little area and try and do our best. And lots of them have already been touched on by the various people who have actually been speaking. So all I'm doing is really endorsing what's being said. Our care group would never have got going if someone hadn't proposed to put a rubbish dump up our road. I think for things to really happen in a community, there has to be a sense of urgency. You know, we can't become immune to all the messages that we get about how poor our water quality is becoming, how terrible global changing is happening, the sea level's coming up and Papamoa's going to be washed out to sea, and so on like that. It's only when it personally affects us that we begin to think that we can do something and that we should do something. And the other thing is, of course, sometimes we feel powerless because the issue seems too big for us to, in actual fact, be able to actually turn around. And we don't listen to the people who have a much greater sense of urgency. Ngāti Pūkenga, because they historically for hundreds of years had depended on the flounder and the teteko and the tuna and everything else that came down that river. They were aware, but we weren't listening. And so it took a shock to actually bring us on board. So we've got a real sense of urgency. There really needs to be a trigger. The other thing that we didn't expect but that we have found is that in actual fact, we were a whole lot of people living on the same road, but we weren't a community. Now we are. So when I go to my mailbox to, in actual fact, collect my mail, people will wave or toot as they go past because they know me and I know them. Loneliness is one of the biggest sicknesses in our communities these days. People living in their little world, disconnected to those very close to them. If we're going to solve our social problems, it's not going to be the parliamentarians and all those sorts of people, all the big agencies. It's going to be communities caring for each other, just as we actually need to care for for another, and I've just lost the last bit of my little presentation. So those are the lessons that we learned, and those are the lessons that we're trying to share. But I'm sure the biggest thing at all, if we hadn't got a big kick in the backside, we would never have got started. We'd have just kept saying how terrible the world is becoming. Now, the big thing is, of course, once you start to see the picture, we should share it. And so Kate organised a care group day for Tauranga Moana, the Kaimai Catchment. We're part of a big scheme. We're trying to improve the water in the harbour by taking much better care of the kaimais and the surrounding areas. So we had a care group day on our road. Quite a few people came along because, you know, we find it much easier to learn by being encouraged than being told what to do. And we find much more useful information by spending time with people doing the same sort of thing as we're doing ourselves. And that's where I think the Landcare Trust, and hoping that Kate's funding can be extended, is really essential in helping communities not just to help themselves, but to work together for common goals. Now, just a final word for the farmers, and we've had some magnificent farmers today, because farmers are getting so much bad press, you know, for damaging the environment, even though the whole country depends on much of the revenue that results from what they do. We find in our care group that the farmers are amongst our most active members. And they're the most useful people because they live off the land, they depend on the land, and they know it better than most of us. Once the farmers come on board, you're really on to a winner. And I'm sure Fred will tell us that much more clearly when he talks about what's happening out at Raglan. Because they can see the results. And one of our local men said to me, "This is the best season I've ever had. I can now use paddocks I've never used before because my calves are not going to fill into the stream. And I don't have to get up all night and check my stock whenever there's a storm." And he's passionate about clearing for his rivers, but we've still got a wetland in his farm that I haven't got hold of as yet. But you know, we're making things happen. And we've still got a long way to go. You know, we need to do a lot more planting, and we need to know a lot more about the rhythms of the local environment, because each area is quite unique. You know, the biodiversity of the Waitau River is really quite different to the next valley that's further on. And what we actually need to do is to become experts in our own little corner of the world. We learn a lot with Ngā Whenua Rahui at Mātauranga Maori. Mātauranga Maori isn't general principles that we'll find in a textbook. It's about the knowledge of the people living on the land, living with the land, living from the land, living there in a way that everything flourishes. And it's that knowledge that we build up by actually becoming totally involved with it, listening, touching, wanting, caring, and doing all those sorts of things. So we have to learn the local rhythms of our own local environment so that we can care for it better. And as we know, more and more we really share our passion. We really come to love the place, and we become part of the land, as some of our speakers have already said this morning. The other point we've got to make it is that we're all extremely busy people. You know, most of our key people work full time. You know, I work all around the country and other people do the same, but we're still making it happen. And so what we've done is minimised all the structures. We saw that yesterday on our field trip. We don't have meetings every month, and we don't spend half our meeting trying to rectify the minutes. We have a meeting as often as we need to. We meet at the nursery. We get the job done. We put key people in key places and keep things happening so busy people are not tied up by unimportant things, and we can put our energy into making it happen on the land. And even with our children, sometimes we don't teach kids because we're too busy. So that's why we've got a children's group for those people who have that gift of teaching children. The other thing about it is we're still not really in touch with everything. We're still not working closely enough with Ngāti Pūkenga. They called a meeting because of the young people who have been killed in an accident on our road, and most of our valley never turned up. We have to build those communities, because the more we work together, the more we will succeed. And we need to focus on what we have in common than on those few things that actually make us different. Our greatest strength and our greatest achievements happen when we work together, and that's what we're trying to do more and more. But we still consider ourselves just beginners. And the most important thing is we're saying to each other, we want our kids to enjoy the things that we used to enjoy. We used to play in rivers, and we used to have our fun out in the bush. And the kids around the country, the old people will say, when we came home from school, we didn't have chippies, we had berries. And we picked them off our trees. And that's why we never got the flu, because we know now that they're full of antioxidants. This is a world that we're trying to create, and we're just going to make it happen in our little valley. Kia ora tātou.